Kylan, great to chat with you here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm going to start off with my very overused question I ask every guest. You're walking down the street and you have an Inworld AI sweatshirt on. Someone goes, "What is Inworld AI?" What do you tell them?
The AI engine for games, basically making games come to life using the power of generative AI.
And then immediately when you say that, they're even more interested, right? Especially if they're into video games. So let's kind of go through now. Let's say they are familiar with video gaming. How does it go from there? What you tell them?
I think it really. I mean, the funny part is, the first question I'm gonna ask them is, what kind of games do you play? Because someone might be a mobile gamer and some gotcha games. Someone might be a hardcore Call of Duty gamer. Someone might be spending hours online on World of Warcraft. So depending on the type of gamer that you are, I think that AI has a completely different impact. So for example, one thing that I often use because people are very familiar with first-person shooters is, imagine you had Halo, Call of Duty, one of these games where you had, you're in a first-person shooter, but you don't have a multiplayer scenario. You're playing on your own, and now you have a companion. That companion might be something disembodied, like a Cortana or a Navi from Zelda, that's following you around, answering questions, interacting with the environment, depending on what you tell it to do. Or it could be something embodied. Imagine like a squad mate in Call of Duty, or actually, a cooperative player in Halo. And now you're actually able to play the game as if you're playing with another person, but it's with AI. And maybe the AI also has access to like game controls and access to changing the game state in a way that wouldn't be possible with a human multiplayer scenario. So that's a great one because most people kind of get first-person shooters. And then if you look at an RPG style scenario, right, companions are a huge part of this. Most people who are familiar with the gaming world have played Baldur's Gate 3 in the last few years. It really set a new standard in terms of like what relationships with companions looked like. It was still scripted, but it felt extremely diverse. Honestly, like the amount of content you'll still see on YouTube and Reddit and everything else coming out just about Baldur's Gate, even though it's now almost a couple years old, is pretty wild. And I think it just shows that ability to have that deeper, rich, agentic relationship with characters in a world. So that's, I think, where it steers. And then even more broadly, if someone said, "Oh, I don't really play video games, but I'm interested in like how these things can affect me." Well, let's imagine that you're watching Netflix and you pause the show and you are now able to talk to one of the characters in your favorite show, something like that. Or even, just in the, imagine building a movie, but instead of actually having to use I don't even want to kind of think about just the anthropomorphic sides of it. So I think that agents and AI can also affect things in terms of environmental awareness. So for example, being able to adapt, let's say, tree behavior and background animations, those kinds of things in real time without a human having to set that up. So it's basically just making these virtual worlds more realistic, using sort of more non-deterministic logic that wasn't possible before using purely manually programmed systems.
And I think you're really going to catch the attention of the avid video game players because their minds racing with all the possibilities, right? Like this will change video gaming completely, because in the past it was really just what is already programmed is what you're going to get, and now it'll be able to react in some cases real time, right? Let's go specifically. Let's talk about what a lot of video game players are used to, the NPCs, right? So as it relates to NPCs. With what you're building, like, will they be able to possess like memories, thoughts, like their personalities will change throughout the gameplay as a result? And I guess how could this change the way video gamers are playing these games?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, this is honestly, I think, where like phase one of AI for games really started was like the NPC journey, and really was mainly focused on conversational aspects. And now I think the main focus of the last year has been pushing it into more agentic behavior, taking actions in the world, environmental awareness, being able to actually orchestrate multiple agents. So in general, though, it opens up a few things. So one is, now imagine game mechanics that are dependent on some kind of social interaction, either a primary character. So let's say right now you were an NPC in a game, and the game was, perform well on a podcast. That kind of game wasn't possible before, but actually we could create that, if you really wanted to. But on the other side too, the depth of NPCs in video games, you look at very famous ones like Tifa in Final Fantasy VII. It's still kind of, you're always feeling like the relationship is just kind of seen through this like scripted lens. And so I think there's just a change in the way that people will be able to relate to NPCs, which is basically like they're co-op players. It's I think something new that we're just figuring out, but I think people will start to have a relationship that is similar to like someone they would play co-op with. And also what we're also seeing is we don't want to remove that human element, so we're seeing games integrating both human and AI characters. So you could imagine you and I log on like late at night one day, and we are playing our first person shooter game or our RPG game together, and we are collaborating with our two other squad mates who are AI. But we've now been playing with them for, let's say, 40 hours, and they remember us. They know Jared, Kylan, remember, like, this was your background. Oh, how was work today? you know these little things. And it would, I think, be a really interesting way as well to facilitate that connection between us. So it's this idea of like human AI cooperation, I guess, towards the fun. And then, of course, within the game itself, you're going to have your shopkeepers, your background characters, your intelligent crowds that are now actually acting as if they were realistic. So you're also just kind of dialing up the fidelity of the world. But I don't think a lot of it's just coming down to like just talking NPCs. So it's more about like you would just be able to look out into the game world and see these characters behaving autonomously and taking realistic actions. And sometimes you might walk up to them and talk to them, but it goes far beyond just dialogue.
I think you hit upon something that's super important, and a lot of gamers will, like, a lot of people game for that social connection. And when their friend's not online, they either don't game, right, or they're just doing something solo. So now you're saying they'll be able to. And then if I
Mm-hmm.
told them something, the AI like teammate, something a couple weeks ago about how I'm going it'll actually
Yeah,
be able to say like, hey, how was Disney, by the way?
yeah.
That's wild.
It's very simple, right? But it's that little thing, and I think it's like one of the deeper areas where like we need to think on like how game design evolves, because we cannot lose that human to human element. It's the same thing as why I don't think personalized media will work, right? Like we watch the same shows, we listen to the same music because it gives us a thing to connect on. So we can't have AI just completely taking over from all the human connection. So there is that deeper question of like, even if you log on and play with my like AI emulating character, what happens when we log on back together, and how does that AI kind of fit into still evolving our co-player relationship?
So what are some of like the big technical challenges that you face in creating this business? This is not easy stuff that you're doing. So like I would be curious. You don't have to go into. You don't have to tell us the secret challenges that you're facing, but like any ones that really stand out to you.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is just that what gaming needs is very different from what most other AI companies need. So we start with this idea of like what we need to have is the best AI building blocks for games, period. Basically, what we call primitives. These kind of sets of building blocks that you can use to construct different solutions. But what we've found is lots of the existing solutions around large language models, text to speech models, like a lot of these things that we're seeing on the market are not well set up for games specifically. And so we've basically had to rethink, and media, I'd say in general, real time interactive media. Basically, their latency, their quality, their naturalness. A lot of them, like a lot of the large models, have been brainwashed to the point that they sound like a robot, no matter how you talk to them. And so we have been, really focused on how do we get those best building blocks, and that's super hard because we're talking about like like specific large language models that are set up for these generic tasks and coding, and now we need to set them up to be either generating dialogue, narrative content, game state code, which is very unique domains. Now the next challenge is like how do you pipe this all together in a way that like meets the performance requirements of a game. You need to basically have like under 1 second roughly like latency in every response, which is super fast, and you need to be able to do a lot of complex machinery within that. And so how do you basically connect these all together and allow the customization on top of it? Because we're not just saying everybody's using the same pipeline. I can tell you every single studio and every single character within a studio or game is using a completely different pipeline. And so how do we basically take those building blocks, allow the developer to customize them and to fit them together in the way that works specifically for them? And then the last challenge is how do we like serve that efficiently? So one of the big questions is like how do we stop making server side connections, because games that require internet connection block off a lot of players, certain types of playtime. So how do we bring that locally, which is a very hard technical challenge of basically how do you take these complex machine learning systems and have them operating on a local device? And actually, in most cases, that's a last generation local device because most people haven't adopted the latest and greatest hardware yet. So lots of challenges in there.
Will we need to see like hardware continue to improve as well? Like obviously, like the avid video gamer typically goes to like a PC, right? Because it's just the performance is so much better than an Xbox or a PS5 or whatever it is. Because those it doesn't matter when you're playing one of those other devices, those consoles, they heat up super fast as it is, right? Like this will obviously be an additional load on them. Like, so what do you think we also need to see in terms of the hardware? Like, what needs to
Yeah.
change with the hardware over time as well?
You're totally right. I think there's two curves. One is basically like, let's say the ML or AI efficiency, and the other curve is basically hardware, hardware capability. And there is of course hardware on the market, like you say, that can run this all today locally, right? If you get a great the top of the line NVIDIA chip, you've got your top of the line gaming computer setup, spend 10 grand on it, you can run all of this locally. But most people don't have that, and most people are not going to ever have that. And in the same sense, like, the PS5, the Xbox were not built with AI in mind. Meaning, when a developer builds a game, they say, I'm going to build this game to maximize, to get to like 100% of the known capacity that they have on the console hardware, so that I can maximize graphics, so that I can maximize performance, response times. And now I'm going to add on another requirement to add the AI into there. So that becomes the challenge is when you're looking at sort of like existing generation games, when you add on AI, it becomes challenging. So a developer kind of also has to build it in from the beginning. But that's where I think the push towards more like localization of the runtime, and also frankly rewriting it to be much more efficient, is going to be key, because we need to make it work. Most people are probably still going to have current generation consoles for a long time. So it means that actually that sort of AI efficiency curve is the thing that might kind of drive the adoption earlier. But my estimation is within, 5 years, it is going to need to be the case that probably the next generation consoles are going to have AI chips or just some advanced GPUs that allow you to split the traffic. Or we're going to figure out some weird hybrid solutions where maybe our people are plugging in separate processors into their consoles to be able to run certain games and capabilities.
Do you think with how much like all the technology is progressing that how like Xbox and PlayStation they would go longer like an amount of it would be a couple years before they release a new console. Do you think they'll have to even increase the amount of like it's been PS4 is still you can still buy games like it's still around, right? Do you think we'll have to start seeing these hardware companies like Xbox and PlayStation start to put out consoles more often to meet where technology is heading?
It's a good question. I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of different solutions here. I think for
Hmm.
sure the next generation consoles are going to have some basic in-house AI capabilities. And I think with model efficiency increasing, like you should just see better and better performance on that same hardware. At the same time, there might be some new stuff, especially as we start looking at like new XR experiences, PSVR, where you now are looking at like not only AI, but new levels of graphics requirements, where I do wonder if they'll start just thinking about adding on some kind of external device. These are just thoughts, right? Of how can we make it easier for consumers to adopt the required hardware. There's other interesting things like Apple stepping into the gaming ecosystem, for example, though, where now Apple has a lot of the latest silicone is actually able to run games great. A lot of games aren't built for Mac still yet, but I think there's also other things like which hardware actually ends up being used in 5 years is still up for debate. We're still looking at the current kind of console space because that's been dominant for the last 2 decades. But there's a good chance that gaming switches to new devices as its actually primary realm, and that's I think a primary question as well, because maybe it doesn't matter as much because people are using consoles for something different than they're using some AI specific kind of gaming computer.
Now, Kylan, you can't talk AI without talking ethics, right? They go hand in hand. So, what ethical considerations do you think developers should prioritize
Hmm.
as this continues to progress?
Yeah, there's a few kind of key things. One of the biggest challenges you have with gaming, and when I say gaming in this context, I'm talking like really broadly. Let's think about casinos, blackjack, gambling, all those kinds of things. Gaming does always have a risk, of course, of being able to control behavior, of being able to like manipulate. Those are all things people are really scared about AI. So I think it's how you, and also I think it has the ability to, let's say, shape views. So if you built characters of a certain demographic and you had them represent in a certain way, that might actually change people's views. So I think there's just a general responsibility that developers need to have in terms of their understanding of what they're doing and like the kind of impact of that. And we kind of help enforce that, so when we have developers working on our platform, we notice them maybe, going towards some boundary or line, we can help kind of tell them, we see, this is maybe a better practice. This is how you can keep it more safe within guardrails. So there's like a general responsibility and also understanding who your audience is. So for example, if you have a GTA style game versus a game that's meant for education for K to 12, you're gonna have to be much more careful in terms of everything that you're building there. We have those kind of systems in house to allow for those controls, but we leave it up to the developer. This is an important decision that we made, which is we as a company have certain sort of boundaries around all the content that we're able to build, but we also put a lot of trust in our developers. And so we expose controls to them, and then we provide best practices. So this is to say that I think developers also just need to really think responsibly about what is the thing that I'm putting into the world? How might it shape people's views towards certain groups? How might it impact, let's say if you're exposing it to kids, what does the content being put in there? But it's basically the exact same as if you're putting any movie, TV show, YouTube video, anything else. It's just a piece of content. I think that just sometimes though people don't recognize how AI is able to kind of maybe elaborate on that content. And so it's just really important to make sure that you get the core right, which is, let's say your character design, the voices that you use, the knowledge that you provide. But it's really up to the developer to do that. And we, work with our customers now to kind of coach on that. But I do think it's just a learning process for the industry.
So from a customer standpoint and from a partner standpoint, who do you want to work with? Who should be like, if they hear this and they want to work with you, whether it's a partnership or they want to become a customer, who is that ideally?
Yeah, so we cover, anyone in gaming and media and beyond. So, but the kind of short answer is we love people who have some existing idea. So it doesn't matter if you've tested it out. Anybody who has some idea of how AI could create a new game, could augment a game that they already have, something that they really want to get their hands on and build with. As soon as we have that, we have a great team set up to kind of come in and actually be able to help you prototype, get it stood up, and figure out the viability. So they're basically anything in the space of gaming. That also can include anyone who's tackling, let's say, developer-facing problems. So, we want to use AI to localize all of our different content. We want to use AI to do different tasks. Those kinds of things as well, we're very interested in engaging with. So it's not just those looking to integrate agents or AI into kind of player-facing solutions, but also on the developer-facing side. And then we're also looking at partners, for example, who are interested in, let's say, gaming adjacent use cases, media companies who want to take IP and bring it to life. In branding, looking at in-person events, looking at, like, let's say, interactive advertising, those kinds of things, as well as corporate training and basically all training and education is actually a really interesting space because it is interactive and gamified. So I guess to say it, don't just want games, but also like any gamified media. And there's a lot of gamified media that exists there, Duolingo, all these different apps, where I think that we can also have a major impact because ultimately it's just bringing the best technology from the gaming world to actually augment these other industries as well. So that's really what we're looking for. And we often enter into like deeper co-development relationships with our partners, and so we try and kind of build their AI understanding. So even if the ideas are early, we can help with helping flesh them out.
Did you ever watch the show Silicon Valley?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so if people consented in, are we going to see a world where it was like that Colin guy where you say something like, "Oh, I want Taco Bell," and then a Taco Bell advertisement? Like, are we if people are we going to see something like that eventually? If you opt in, like, could that be a way to
Yeah,
also pay for game, or is that pushing it?
possibly. You don't actually need AI to do that. So it's kind of a separate question, but yes, you could do it, right? Because you could just detect like what language or things is someone using, and then I just populate an ad that Taco Bell, sent me. Certainly, I think there are games that are already doing that though with in-game advertising. Not contextually aware per se. That's definitely interesting. I think we'll run into some, there's definitely some challenges there in like certain types of personalized ads. So it's not something that we've like gone too deeply in, but I definitely think it's interesting if it can be effective. I think where we maybe want to see it start is like in-game economies. So it's very different if I say, buy this, brand of water in the real world versus like buy this health potion in the game, right? Those are two very different things, and kind of one is more in world and one is, more out of the world. So I do think that's where I see more of it kind of starting is like, how can we use this to help people kind of like manage in-game economies? And then I think going beyond that for sure. at some point that will, I mean, it already happens in Fortnite all the time, right? You have your X branded, items or whatever else. So I think they will kind of start there and then kind of start bleeding into real world advertising as well.
Yeah, then you have kids with their parents' credit card and they start buying all these different things
Yeah.
for the new skins. And they were, I mean, there's other companies that have done this, but they were very successful, right? With like not charging for the game and being able to create a very sustainable business as a result of that.
Yeah.
I think it'll unlock more of those types of opportunities, right? More people, like, well, let's kind of give you two scenarios. It's already starting to change, but do you think we'll see more of some sort of in-game like currency, like people buying stuff in the game versus even having to pay for games in the next few? I know we still have to pay for like sports games and things like that,
Mm.
but is that even going to go away?
Yeah, it's different gamers. I think certain people tend towards just single, like, games that are single purchase. For example, like you have games like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate. There's in-game currency in those games, but you certainly don't pay extra. You can't buy it. There's no buy to win option. Um, I just think there's different types of gamers. Like people who are more tending towards like large scale multiplayer experiences may tend towards that, and that's I think what you continue to see. So games that kind of make most of their money off of like social multiplayer tend to offer themselves free. They kind of allow, Fortnite's a great example of that too, and then they allow monetization on top of that. So I think it will continue to be split in some ways, um, but I certainly see that more games are moving towards more live services and live ops. And I imagine that new forms of monetization, let's call it this AI augmented advertising, is definitely an interesting avenue there that could potentially make those more viable too.
Kylan, as we start to wrap up here, what's next that you can tell us that you're really excited about?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, a few things. Generally, we are looking for partners now to start exploring on-device work. Basically, this is the ability to actually get games operating entirely on device. We need dedicated partners who are kind of like looking for a launch there. I think this is going to be a huge change generally for the way that AI kind of goes after media because it will remove the ability to have kind of, any local cost or any server side costs. Um, we're also looking at the really moving beyond sort of conversation to fully agentic, contextually aware behavior. And that I think is very interesting when you think about kind of the ability to like do player emulation. So for example, like I'm playing with you, your server side connection drops off, I continue to play, or I create a copy of myself and able to play. So those kinds of beyond conversation agentic contexts, where for example they're taking actions, they're kind of acting on your behalf. Um, and then generally, I'm very interested in anyone looking at, new genres of games. So this is where we're starting to see is kind of new types of game experiences that were not possible before, new types of simulation experiences that are actually using, a bunch of AI components under the hood to kind of make that more realistic. People love The Sims, but making that even better. Um, that's I think really kind of and then we're seeing a few other things like these kind of social games. So we have partners, for example, at a company called Playroom, which did Death by AI, kind of this fun social game that allows you kind of try and beat AI to survive by telling it what you're going to do. But there's a lot of these interesting genres. So I'm mainly interested in how, as we go beyond dialogue and we allow AI to control more of the game state, can we unlock even new genres? And how maybe, for example, by bringing it locally to on-device serving, can we maybe make this accessible to, like, say, these freemium mobile games where you can't pay, $5 per user per year. So you want to make sure that it's free ultimately for them to even like receive that application. And so I think that all opens up the ability kind of for new games to even be built. And that's what we're mainly focused on now.
I love it. Last question for you: what are you most looking forward to from the Human X event?
Um, I think I'm just generally excited right now about seeing how people are bringing together, like, let's say, these brand new technologies, and how that ultimately impacts, like, human life and experience. I think in my case, the way that I'm looking at this is, of course, that I generally see gaming as one form of recreation that affects human experience, and so I'm just generally excited, I think, to see how these two worlds kind of come together, and I kind of love the thesis. So yeah, just excited to kind of see what everybody comes up with, and maybe what the new ideas are that are coming out.
I love it. Well, I'll be seeing you there. Should be a great event. March will be here before we know it. Hopefully not too quick. The year already flew by,
Yeah.
but really looking forward, Kylan, to future conversations. Thanks so much for joining us here on the show and wishing you the best of luck. Super exciting what you're working on.
Thanks so much, Jared. Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.